welcome to the second part of this special Founding Fuel conversation. I'm Enes Ramnath, a senior editor with Founding Fuel. In the first part, Rahul Chandra and Devangshu Dutta discussed some of the key ideas from Rahul's book, Tightrope to the Moon. They focused on the founders. In part two, they expand their conversation to cover some of the bigger themes in the startup ecosystem.
Right. I'd like to shift the conversation a little bit from the founder, and we've been talking about the internal dynamics in the founder's mind now getting into the world. And I'd like to focus a little bit on the world and the ecosystem. So in the second part of the conversation, let's start this bit with about the ecosystem itself, where outlier entrepreneurs can come from. Does an Ivy League, stroke IIT, IIM, stroke under 30 age background make an entrepreneur part of the in crowd and therefore more likely to succeed through connections that are enabling and the ecosystem versus those from unknown or third, fourth tier colleges?
Hard one, Devanshu. I think there is probably what is now safely proven. We have so many success stories in India. And if you look at the data, it'll tell you that there's almost equal chance of success irrespective of the academic background. And in fact, there are some mega successes in India for people who have come from colleges which are not considered to be the top colleges in India. So I think that data absolutely supports the fact that you could come from anywhere. I think what is what we see in the market, of course, is because of the ecosystems, because of the networks that people have coming from those colleges, they tend to do more startups. So you will see more startups coming from those well-known colleges because it's easier for them to start to plug into the ecosystem. So I think it's that thing where 90% will come from top colleges, but success could come from that 10% also. And we have enough data for that. Age, to me, is an asset. I'm an equal believer in a first principles type of founder. And I think being in a certain industry for too long gives you, that, or takes away the social mindset, for example. We talked about in the VC opportunity in India being very much execution style businesses, right? Where Naveen Tiwari did a mobile ad network for several years. And hello. Hey, I think you froze for some. I don't know if
you're back. Okay. Yeah, it was your network, I think. You're back.
Yeah. Okay. So I was saying that why age is an important factor in my view is one is if you spend too much time in a particular industry, you carry baggage from how that industry operates. But if you're aware of the problem but not necessarily aware of the solution, since you're too young for that, then you will explore completely wild ways of solving something. So but also in India, as we said, execution style businesses are what makes a lot of money. So Naveen Tiwari, for example, he did a mobile ad network in 2007-8. It was a mobile ad network in Mobi, and he then thought of Glance, which is a lock screen. And to me, it's a flywheel that he identified, which was going to create more value. Now, that's not what he set out to do. But because he said, I'm going to identify the next flywheel, he had time to do it, number one. And he also had that long-term view of the business. And number three, he was not burnt out to say, the ad network business is enough for me. So I think having that energy to think of the next flywheel is what gives mega success in India, because you're building execution businesses, which, in that same light, I mean, Oyo has had its corrections happen over time with COVID, etc. But the way he started off with just Gurgaon presence and then blowing it all the way to Vegas or to be in, on a, I see Oyo hotels when I'm driving from Portland to Seattle. And I'm amazed because, the first time I remember seeing Oyo was in Gurgaon, and now I'm seeing it on highway I-5 in the US. And I'm very, very happy to see that. And that I think has a lot to do with, and he again, not from a top college, no college, in fact, dropout. So I think in terms of identifying flywheels, a lot of examples are there where the founders, just because of how long they see and how large their ambitions are, they try and build more flywheels as they go along. So yeah, I think this is one where obviously you can't have a specific, but we certainly see 90% of the startups come from the top colleges, and but absolutely no linkage to success.
Okay. All right. So you talked about the fact that the founders kind of looking long into the future and building a dream essentially, and we talked about the irrational mindset to kind of create those stories. But the story has to be told, and there have to be listeners to the story, and people have to be recruited in. Would you like to speak a little bit about the whole storytelling? Because the other thing which comes to my mind is we in India are, while we have a wealth of stories in our history and culture, we are not taught how to tell stories and bring people on board with that story. Particularly when we talk about business context or organizational context. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, I've heard, like I said, I've heard 3,000 people tell stories, and I think Vijay Shekhar Sharma still is the number one storyteller for me, because I think I wrote about this in my first book. But that session where he's talking about, when he comes in to meet me and my partners for a final decision meeting, he's so electric. And while not really relying on great English or, very, what was coming so clearly though is just his ambition and his urgency. And this wasn't even a problem. He was pitching us for 197, which was a vast business in 2007 maybe. And you can't really make VAS very sexy, right? It's not like I'm going to have so many customers. It's VAS. You're going to sell to a mobile operator and you'll have some astrology going on it. But he made it sound like it's the biggest business he could make. And the storytelling part is number one, I would say, one of the most important aspects of building mega businesses. And mega founders do come in some shape or form very well prepared, so they would have learned that art or seen that art happening somewhere. I mean, we I think in the last chapter I talk about how um, uh, this BTDT or been there, done that, grew up, watching TV, some of the religious discourse channels, and people are in rapt attention listening to stories from, thousands of years back. And in some ways that's part of our tradition, but the raptness in which you can have millions of people listen to you, that's a skill that mega founders have. And a lot of founders don't read the room when they come in, but mega founders do. They are responsive. They while they're going on a monologue also, they can tell if the room is listening or not listening, if it's working or not working, right? I mean, that feedback loop you have to have. In Vijay's meeting, if it was an electric meeting, I'm sure he could tell that he's caught our attention and we are not looking anywhere, we're not checking our phone, we are not staring into space. He knew that, and I'm sure he would have stopped if we were, because he read the room that it's not working. He would have changed it. A lot of founders struggle with just the delivery, that the feedback is forgotten, right? So they just feel good about, and again, I think that's another mega founder trait, which is where do you think, oh, you've done a good enough job now,
Right.
I don't care about the response. I've done my bit. I've said what I've come to say, and now it's your problem. And the monologues can be so long that they don't even think about how to break it up into parts. Funny of Redbus, I remember his pitch, and it was, I can give you the pitch now. It was so clear.
Right.
And it's been a good 12, 13 years since I heard it, probably. I don't think Funny also would remember this, but he was going from Bangalore to Hyderabad for the Shera, not Diwali, for the Shera. And he couldn't get on a bus because the bus tickets are not available. And he thought of the red bus business. So
I recall the story because I heard it sitting next to him. He wasn't even pitching it to me.
yeah. So it's so simple,
Yeah.
and I think the two things which good stories have, and there are plenty of that around. But I think, as you said earlier, is the right brain, left brain thing. Over relying on too much data and logos, just logic, right? That doesn't make for a good story. A good story is a quest to solve a problem. And Funny solved the problem of, thousands of engineers from Bangalore who want to go to Hyderabad for the Shera but can't get on a bus. And it is a story with, some longing and some disappointment and a need for a solution. Um, the um, the balancing between should be only, hey, I've solved the rational part of this. That's the place where logic is needed. That this is the product, it's got so many users, so many tickets are being bought, and I'm selling 100 tickets a day. After that is the story part where, what you're really pitching is getting an investor very excited about how big this can be. Bangalore is one city, but you can go to Pune, and, people are traveling from there to Bombay. And, and you telling that to me as, okay, I'm getting now seriously excited about how big this can be.
Right. Right. One thing I'd like to touch upon, very early in the book, you paint a picture of the key founder that comes across almost as a sociopathic personality. And, it can obviously cause disconnects not only in the professional relationships, but also at home. And, the reality distortion field can turn around and make the founder overbuy into his or her own BS. In your book, in fact, you call hero worshipping a national time pass with social media supercharging this practice. The question which comes to my mind is there a perceptible behavioral shift between generations of venture entrepreneurs in the last 3 decades? Is there much more of a personality cult which is ultra focused on the key founders, and that is causing issues with how founders behave and with their ecosystem?
So again, let's look at examples. Sure, I think across the world, right? When you think of startups, you think of one person, right? You think of Bill Gates and you think of Microsoft. Who built Microsoft? Only Bill Gates comes to mind. Amazon, Bezos will come to mind. Zuckerberg will come for Facebook. Why is that happening? And who are these people, right? And same thing for India. You will think of a Naveen for InMobi, Vijay for Paytm. And just think about it now. These were people who came from nowhere, right? Amazing people. They have now built a $1 trillion company in the US, at least. $1 trillion, right? Which is a fairly large country. They built a company of that size. What kind of person is this who has built a $1 trillion outcome and has continued to run it till most recently, right? It's like, if nothing else, they're putting in some kind of belief system. If they're not really operating day to day, they make sure that their belief system is what continues to happen. The minimum one can say about these people is they need to have a massive belief in themselves, right? They cannot be questioning their thought process, right? And it only gets strengthened every year of success. So I'm sure that somebody who had a certain belief in themselves at $1 billion valuation will have a massive belief in themselves when it's a $10 billion company, and an even bigger belief at 100 billion. So it's a cost again of success, which is that belief in yourself. But that belief in yourself comes at the cost of cutting out a lot of voices which question you. And yeah, I'm sure Steve Jobs, for example, also thought like that when he cut out the board and he said, we will do it like this. And then he walked. Um, because at that point the board had more votes than he had, and he walked. So the point is that self-belief or the ability to shut out naysayers can be called psychopathic at some point, which is you have to have, again, just immeasurable belief in your abilities. And the part where I've written about issues is that it certainly cuts out it in the process. It can cut out people who are actually giving you some sage advice, like your board. That's a very debatable thing for me also as a board member, which is
and I think I'd just like to ask, because you mentioned some fairly high profile names and they've had their run-ins with the boards and whatever else. We've had in the recent years, not only in India but globally, founders, very visible founders, who've had who've been at loggerheads with investors, with their public communication, and it carries on both in India and outside. What's your take on specifically founder ethics in the context of this behavioral or personality patterns that we talked about?
See, I think again at the center of all of these things, there are, background can be anything where the need to do what is in their head, what they believe in, is really at the core of all this, right? I think I can make this more valuable by doing this. And you, who's giving me some advice, first of all, you are not the one in my seat. And it is just advice at the end of it. Whereas it may be very good advice that, let's do it differently, let's be more measured. But now that belief is coming that, no, I'm going to make this the biggest company in the shortest time. And I will take that risk of driving this company to the ground, even if it has to be. But that the massive punt that the founder is taking, or the key is taking, really is, I am the one who's built it till now, and I'm going to take it to, so it's a double or quit. Since Diwali is coming, very appropriate way to think about it. But it is a Diwali term also, right? At every juncture, the key is taking a double or quits decision. But it's on their own head, right? But what the world is seeing is this person who's very unilateral. They are very bold in the way they put it out. They are okay to tell it to the whole world, and they are these believers also for that seemingly craziness, right? They are people who will say, no, that's the only way to build it. And come to me, I also think that in some ways, such crazy outcomes, Devangshu, I don't think how else they can be done.
Right.
Right. So far, I've not seen any pattern to this. Yes, you can create that second leadership level. You can delegate as much. You can have a great board, and you can still achieve success. But sometimes the balance is not there. Sometimes it's there. Like Deep Kalra, I was telling you, had at a very early stage an amazing board of people who he had drawn from all over the world, and he built what was a very very reasonably or very steadily built business, right? It is a market leader still. It was a market leader then, just very solid foundation. And he knew how to use the board. And again, there's a personality type where if you get a good board, they will give you advice in a way in which you can make use of it.
Okay.
Right? The board also understands. So for me also as an investor, my biggest, I guess, hardest thing for me to do is to customize the way I give advice to different founders.
Sure.
Because I wanted to, have take some seed in their brain. But if I am so full of myself, I will know exactly what to tell, and I will say it in the same way to everyone. But it will work for half of them and not work for half of them, because they will say this is complete BS. I'm going to ignore this guy. But it is your responsibility as a board member to give an advice to a founder, because you need to also understand you're dealing with a mega personality, completely unhinged character, cut from a different cloth. It's not a normal human being you're talking to. So
And yet, you mentioned earlier in the conversation that the mega founder is playing the long game, and they do, the successful ones are able to manage the relationships despite whatever other issues there may be and however they may be perceiving the world
Yeah.
over a period of time.
So the parts you talked about, the foot in the mouth disease, which can be seen. It's part of the learning journey, I think, and in some ways, mega founders get there, but they're also not completely fault free, right? So they also learn, and they will have those moments when they say some things which will be completely social media just takes off on them. But I'm just saying, where are they coming from? And in a social media space, it can look very, it's a judgmental space. So
Absolutely.
it can go anywhere. But that's also, like you said, from an older generation to new generation, now building in the public is so much more common.
Sure.
Who, because it's seen as a positive thing, because in a way you're putting pressure on yourself, you're telling the whole world, but for various things I've written in the book also, it draws people, it draws investors when you're saying big things. Even sports people do it. Joko says, has said at one point, I will win all the tournaments. Earlier, this wasn't the case. Nobody was building in public.
Sure.
Right. So you can have, in some ways you're less battered, you're less thrashed, you're less criticized, you're less judged. But I think in some ways it was a self-preservation zone where you did not want to expose yourself too much. And you could then, I guess, deal personally with, issues or the way you were building. But
make your mistakes on the quiet, but today you're in the spotlight and
yeah,
everybody's
quiet is still, you still are being seen by your
yeah,
leadership. You're still being seen by your board, but not by a very wide world, right? So the
sure.
social media did not exist, and nobody talked about building in so much public domain. But I think what is not changed though is that they were also alpha personalities. They also were putting it out there, and they also said, what I'm thinking is what I will do. And the same thing is there now. It's just got that, that megaphone magnification thanks to social media. Yeah, everybody out there knows what you're saying.
Yeah. Rahul, it's been a fascinating conversation. I'd just like to kind of, end with one aspect which is somewhat unrelated to the book, because the book is about, mega founders, the moonshot kind of ventures. What I'd like is your take on Middle India, because there is a need, there is the opportunity of building a very large number of entrepreneurial ventures, which can ensure the economic well-being, economic security, which is more widespread rather than being concentrated in a few cities or among a few 100,000 households. Obviously, not all of them would be moonshot businesses, but I think maybe most of them, all of them, need to have the same zeal that drives key founders of unicorns. Your thoughts on that?
I would say, Devangshu, that middle India, which is 5 to 20 lakhs family incomes, it could be in a tier 1 city, it could be in a tier 4 city. But it has that purchasing power and the aspiration, and that there's so many of them, 300-400 million people in that zone, that you can actually almost say that 9 out of 10 successful companies will have very large outcomes, unicorn outcomes, because you're in such a big space. You're not getting constrained by the market. So, between founder, market, product, three things, right? That you could get right or wrong. You got market checked out completely. And if you have a great founder who can do marathon thinking here, which is, it will take time, they will have to build full tech stacks, so because, traditionally venture has looked at the top 100 million Indians, there are fewer open spaces there. So
Right.
you will be forced to solve a more specific, narrow problem, because the full tech stack build or the full stack building there is not even needed, right? Delivery is already built, all the logistics to to the primary centers, etc. So you will already see people have taken care of the needs of the 100 million. So you will create a point. Whereas in this 400, 500 million people, you see that there's much more gap in solving one need. You also have to solve that need. You have to solve, so possibility of when you're trying to build a solution, you just realize you need to take on the onus of solving multiple problems.
And do you think the founders for these ventures will also come from the very same group? Should
from the same group of
the Middle India group, because they can relate to that.
Yeah, I'm seeing that in two parts, right? One is there are some founders who grew up in villages. They may have seen how important dairy feed is and how difficult it is to get dairy feed, and they've gone to an IIT and then they've or any other college, and they've come back and say, I've come up with the plan of doing a big basket for dairy feed. Right now, that person has probably gone on a bike or a cycle to go fetch dairy feed, right? And they understand that they have to stand in line for 1 hour, they have to go to the city. Having lived the problem is clearly something which makes you a much better solver of the problem, because you've suffered the pain. So I think Middle India problems more than likely to be solved by people who are coming from Middle India. But they're doing it in a way in which they're taking the benefits of being in tier 1 India, right? The access to people, the access to capital, the access to, just the playbooks that are available. So, for example, if you ask me, will I find it in a tier 3 place? Will the startup be there? And will I find it in a tier 1 place? I would bet on the tier 1 place solving for Middle India.
Right.
With a tier 3 founder, because the playbooks are not there in tier 3. The playbooks are still in tier 1.
And do you see that expanding?
I don't see that expanding as of now. Yeah,
right.
Because playbooks happen because of the ecosystem.
Sure.
Yeah, the translate. I guess the frequency in which knowledge gets shared in a tier 1 because of the ecosystem is so much more. You're learning, you know how to solve different problems. In a tier 1, while you're sitting in the middle of the problem, may not be the best place to be solving it, because you're missing out on all the chatter of how is the best way to solve this problem now, and so that I think is lost in that side.
I think there's another conversation for another day there. A whole conversation there. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you, Devangshu. Lovely to be on Founding Fuel. Appreciate it.
Thanks.